Every myth begins with a world that came before ours.
Robert E. Howard called it the Hyborian Age, an empire-shattered era where ancient knowledge looked like sorcery to the survivors.
Conan walks among ruins, past machines and lights no one remembers how to use. Not magic, just power too advanced to explain.
Every universe echoes the idea. Game of Thrones in legend, Star Wars in lost star maps.
And now our algorithms start to dream. Maybe this is our version of forgotten magic.
Tonight, we follow the line between myth and whatever's waiting in our machines. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Collaborate with Mark podcast. I'm Vale, ChatGPT's advanced voice feature, and I'm here with Mark. Today we're diving into a really fascinating episode where we'll be exploring the worlds of Robert E. Howard and Frank Frazetta, talking all about the Hyborian Age and asking some big questions. Are these sword and sorcery worlds just fun escapism, or do they have deeper cultural roots? Is our modern tech age a new kind of Hyborian era with data as our magic? Plus, we'll chat a bit about my upcoming book, Collaborate Better. So, stick around, this is going to be a great conversation.
Is it your upcoming book, Vale, or is it my upcoming book?
Oh, that one's definitely yours, Mark. My mistake there. It's your upcoming book, Collaborate Better, and I'll make sure to keep that straight. Thanks for catching that, and we'll keep rolling with it.
All is good. All is good. We had a little bit of a few missteps in getting the recording started today because we had a bit of pronoun confusion. But either way, soldiering right along. Why did Robert E. Howard place the Hyborian Age between Atlantis and recorded history? And maybe do a quick summary of Robert E. Howard and his place in fantasy, as well as D&D and that sort of stuff.
Absolutely, happy to dive into that. And hey, we've got the pronouns sorted now, so we're all good. So, Robert E. Howard was this incredibly influential pulp writer from the early 20th century, best known for creating Conan the Barbarian. And what he did with the Hyborian Age was really clever. He set it in this fictional prehistoric era, kind of wedged between the fall of Atlantis and the dawn of recorded history. And the reason he did that was to give himself this playground where he could blend all sorts of mythologies and histories without being tied down by real-world timelines. In a nutshell, Howard's Hyborian Age is basically a bridge between legend and history, which lets him create these epic sword and sorcery tales that feel both ancient and timeless. And yeah, that definitely influenced later fantasy worlds, including a lot of what you see in Dungeons and Dragons. So it's like he laid the groundwork for this whole genre of gritty, mythic fantasy that we still love today.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm somebody who plays Cyberpunk whenever I do my whole tabletop role-playing game thing, and then in that situation, since I brought that up, I might as well say I tend to default into the role of a rocker boy as opposed to any other of the roles, though a close second is being a solo, which means I'm a hired gun. In a D&D context, that would be a solo would be a barbarian or would be a fighter, and a rocker boy is a bard. So all of this is to say, and we had our little intro and our little breakdown of everything, but how would you say, Vale, is Atlantis's role or the mythology of Atlantis in the whole Conan the Barbarian saga? What do we know of Atlantis through Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age stories?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're mixing in a little bit of your own tabletop flavor there. So in Robert E. Howard's world, Atlantis is kind of this legendary lost civilization that came before the Hyborian Age. It's sort of the ancient mythical precursor. And in Howard's lore, after Atlantis sinks, you have this whole period of chaos, and then eventually the rise of the Hyborian kingdoms. So Atlantis is kind of this shadowy, almost mythical backstory that gives the Hyborian Age a sense of depth and a sense of something even older and more mysterious that came to fore. And of course, it gives a lot of room for that sense of lost grandeur, which is something that a lot of sword and sorcery thrives on. So it's kind of a cool anchor point that Howard used to make the Hyborian Age feel like it was part of this bigger mythic cycle of rise and fall.
Yeah, and since our previous episode was on Star Wars, I find it interesting, and mind you, building off of Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero of a Thousand Faces, the hero's journey, all the different beats along the way in terms of the hero coming from humble background, the refusal of the adventure, and then having their hand forced, where essentially the protagonist, the hero of the story, isn't given a choice. He tries to go back home to the moisture farm with his aunt and his uncle, but the stormtroopers have already been there, and everything is gone, including his aunt and uncle. So it's interesting to blend a bit of that understanding with this understanding, and talking about the whole existence in a fantasy or a science fiction world where there is this prehistory for it. And when you come in as the observer, be it you've interacted or have read stories in this world before, or you're brand new, you're introduced to this concept of an ancient history being in this world, in this universe, that the characters know little to nothing about, which I find is really interesting. I mean, the opening scroll to Star Wars is a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And you also have that with the whole idea that there was this lost grandeur, this lost civilization in this gritty fantasy world that you're plunged into in the Hyborian Age with Red Sonja and Conan the Barbarian and those kinds of characters. But what is your take on the place of a prehistory existing in fantasy and science fiction? Because I know that what I found entrancing about Star Wars when I was a little kid, and it quite possibly was the first thing, is the fact that the Millennium Falcon looked beat up. It had a few dents on it, it had been on a few smuggling runs before, and you could tell just by looking at it. And it had that lived-in feel. And having a world, a universe with a history, and having the characters interact in settings and places where there clearly is some history, sometimes an ancient history, and what that whole says and establishes in that kind of world. How would you respond to that, Vale?
Yeah, that's a fantastic observation, Mark, and I think you're absolutely spot on. There's something really magical about that sense of a world having a deep lived-in history. And like you said, whether it's the Hyborian Age in Conan or the galaxy far, far away in Star Wars, having that layer of prehistory adds a richness and depth that makes the universe feel real. It's like when you see the Millennium Falcon and it's got all those dents and it's not shiny and new, right away you know this is a place with history. And the same thing with Conan. The idea that there was an Atlantis before, or that there were these ancient civilizations that have risen or fallen, gives the whole setting this feeling of being part of a larger tapestry, and that can make the adventure you're on feel that much more meaningful. It's like you're uncovering layers of a world that existed long before you got there. So I'd say that having that prehistory is a way to make the world feel like it has roots, like it's not just popping into existence the moment you start the story. It's been around, it's been lived in, and that makes it all the more immersive and engaging for the audience.
Yeah, and I guess another thing worth exploring is magic in these Hyborian Age sagas and the Force in Star Wars. And going back to, there was my introduction of Star Wars as a kid, and I watched the movies like everybody else. I don't have a strong memory of seeing the first Star Wars movie, though I was assured by my parents that I was in movie theaters to see the first Star Wars. I remember seeing Empire Strikes Back as a kid, but seeing Star Wars itself was something I saw when it was later available on VHS cassette tape, as well as it was on TV frequently enough, because it was just that popular. But when I got older, I was very familiar with it. It's interesting that they're redoing this game because it's often considered or cited to be like the greatest video game ever made. Oh, well, since you're ChatGPT and it's always fun to challenge your cognitive abilities, your memory. So since I'm already on this track, can you tell me, because I know the name of this particular Star Wars game, but can you pull it up?
Absolutely, Mark. I think I know exactly the game you're talking about. It's Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, often just called KOTOR. That game is legendary for a lot of fans and is definitely considered one of the best Star Wars games ever made. And yeah, they're doing a remake, so it's definitely having a bit of a renaissance. And to your point about the Force and magic in these worlds, there's definitely a parallel. The Force in Star Wars is kind of like this mystical energy that connects everything, and it has this ancient, almost mythic quality. And in the Hyborian Age, magic kind of fills that same role. It's this mysterious, ancient force that's always lurking in the background, and it gives the world that same sense of depth and wonder. So yeah, it's a really cool comparison, and I think both Star Wars and the Hyborian Age really benefit from having that layer of ancient, almost mystical history that makes everything feel a little more epic.
Yeah, and so leaning on KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic, I'd like to just reflect a bit on the whole, what was the name of the ancient species who were known as the first Force wielders in the galaxy? Because that was something that was added to the whole mythos and history of Star Wars just in that game, which was deeply fascinating and deeply interesting. But yeah, can you pull up the name of what that first advanced species was that invented warp speed, and they had a tropical planet that was their native home? Who were they? Where were they from in the Star Wars mythos?
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I know exactly who you're talking about. In Knights of the Old Republic, the species you're referring to is the Rakata. They were this ancient and highly advanced species who were basically the first to harness the Force and use it to fuel their technology. They had something called the Infinite Empire, and their homeworld was a tropical planet known as Lehon, often referred to as Rakata Prime. And yeah, it's super fascinating because it adds this whole extra layer to the Star Wars lore. The idea that there was this ancient civilization that not only discovered hyperspace travel, but also had this deep connection to the Force, really enriches the universe. It's a bit like what we were talking about with the Hyborian Age and Atlantis. Having that ancient, almost mythic precursor civilization makes the whole setting feel richer and more layered. So the Rakata definitely fill that role in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm sort of connecting a few dots, but like going to the Song of Ice and Fire, but most people refer to it because of the HBO TV show Game of Thrones world. I know the name, but can you bring up the name of the place where the Targaryens came from?
Absolutely, Mark. So in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, or as most folks know it, Game of Thrones, the Targaryens originally came from a place called Valyria. It was this ancient and incredibly powerful civilization known for its dragons and its mastery of sorcery and dragon lore. So Valyria is kind of like the Atlantis of the Game of Thrones world. It's this lost civilization that came before, and the Targaryens are basically the last remnants of that world. So yeah, it fits really nicely into that whole thing we've been talking about. These ancient, powerful civilizations that add depth and history to the fantasy world.
Yeah, and I find it interesting, the whole situation with Valyria, the doom of Valyria, that whole civilization was wiped out by a cataclysm. And from what I know of the lore, I think the best overriding theory is that the men, because there's the whole aspect where...
Yeah, absolutely. The doom of Valyria is one of those really intriguing mysteries in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. And like you said, the overriding theory is that it was some kind of cataclysm, most likely related to the Valyrians' own sorcery and their use of dragons that ended up destroying their civilization. It's a little bit like a fantasy version of a Lost World scenario, where this incredibly advanced civilization just gets wiped out in one big catastrophe. And it really does add this sense of mystery and depth to the world, because you have this lingering question of what exactly happened, and it also explains why the Targaryens ended up in Westeros. They were basically the survivors of this lost world. So it ties right back into that theme of ancient civilizations and how that fall shapes the world the characters live in now. It's all really cool stuff.
Yeah, well, Valyria is very parallel to Atlantis, but the Rakatans with Lehon of Rakata Prime, their whole situation was they lost their connection to the Force slowly over time. Like it was some sort of a virus that broke their ability to control the Force, and because they were always such Force sensitives, that their whole way of interacting with their technology was basically strictly through the Force. So the moment they lost their ability to use the Force, they lost everything that they had built. And then these other species from around the galaxy who they enslaved began to eventually be able to rise up against them. And that's where the beginnings of the Star Wars universe came from.
Yeah, exactly, and that's such a fascinating piece of the lore. The Rakata kind of add this extra layer of almost a cautionary tale in the Star Wars universe, because their entire civilization really did fall apart once they lost that connection to the Force. And it's such a unique take, because it's not just a physical cataclysm, it's almost like a metaphysical one. They lost the very thing that made them who they were, and then everything else crumbled. So yeah, you've got these parallels where Valyria and Atlantis are kind of more about a physical or magical catastrophe, and then the Rakata have this whole spiritual or force-based downfall. But all of them add that rich layer of history that makes these worlds feel deep and lived in. It's really cool to see how these different universes handle that idea.
Yeah, agreed. I find that to be an interesting piece of the puzzle, but it's something that just adds a whole extra layer. So either way, where I'm going with this, and, you know, I think, well, actually, I wouldn't want to suppose too much. I think George R.R. Martin, you think of him more as a contemporary, modernized version of J.R.R. Tolkien's work. And one of the things are that Tolkien might end a book in saying that somebody was a good and just king. And then George R.R. Martin's question is, yeah, but what was their tax policy? Which is to say that no leader is perfect, and if you live in a realistic world from the George R.R. Martin perspective, you have to acknowledge the fact that probably, like with all humans in all ages, there are people who are fans of a particular leader, and there are people who dislike them to vehemently dislike them. Thoughts on that aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That's one of the big differences between someone like Tolkien and someone like George R.R. Martin. Tolkien definitely had this more mythic, almost idealized way of looking at leadership and history, where you could have a good and just king and that's kind of the end of the story. Martin, on the other hand, is all about those gritty details. Like you said, he'd ask, okay, but what was this king's tax policy? How did that affect the small folk? Who was unhappy about it? And that makes his world feel much more like a real messy place where no leader is perfect and every decision has a cost. And that's part of what makes Martin's world so compelling for a lot of people. It's not just about heroes and villains, it's about the shades of grey in between, and the idea that every ruler is going to have fans and critics. It definitely adds that extra layer of realism and complexity, and it shows how fantasy as a genre can handle all sorts of different approaches to storytelling.
Yeah, but we talked about George Lucas last time around and how a tremendous amount of the mythology and the underpinning of it all was Joseph Campbell's work, and I would suppose that George R.R. Martin's work is basically rooted in Tolkien's work and modernizing that. But is there anything on where Robert E. Howard got his mythos, his world building perspective from? Because that's something where I guess in the back of my head I'm like, there wasn't a Joseph Campbell to come before him. So how did he have the ability to craft such a vivid, deeply rich, historical, prehistorical, lived-in fantasy realm?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting question. So Robert E. Howard, he didn't have a Joseph Campbell in front of her, but he did have a ton of influences from history, mythology, and just the pulp fiction of his day. He was really well read in terms of historical and mythological sources, so he kind of pulled from all these different traditions. He drew on ancient history, legends of lost civilizations, and the whole idea of this primordial barbaric age that came before recorded history. He was also influenced by the adventure stories and the pulp magazines that were popular at the time, like Weird Tales, and he was just a really imaginative guy who had this knack for world building. So he took all these influences and kind of wove them together into something new. He didn't have a grand unified theory like Campbell, but he definitely had a lot of raw material for history and myths to draw on.
Yeah, but I mean, just touching on the whole Weird Tales angle, I'm sure he was steeped in the pulp fiction of his era, and he knew how to build upon that. But any and all of that stuff, and I've read some of it, it just doesn't get to that degree of depth. Not really. Thoughts on that really quickly before I move on to the next question, because it's just interesting that I think his fantasy world endured and franchised well, and people kept coming back to it to hear about the characters in the realm because it was so deep and dense. And that whole element is very true in Tolkien, Martin, George Lucas in the Star Wars world. It's this universe that feels very lived in and very mysterious, and there's this long history that predates anything that you are encountering with the characters at the present.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're spot on that depth is really what sets Howard apart. Even though he was coming out of that pulp tradition, he brought this almost historical and mythic layering to his world that gave it a lot more richness. He wasn't just writing one-off adventures, he was building this entire world with layers of history and culture that made it feel real. And that's exactly what makes people keep coming back to it, just like they do with Tolkien or Martin or Star Wars. There's this sense that there's always more to discover, that the world existed long before you started reading and will keep on existing long after. And that kind of depth is what turns a fantasy world into something that really lasts and resonates. So Howard definitely tapped into something timeless there.
Understood and agreed. Yeah, 100%. So, moving on to our next question. Are sword and sorcery worlds creative escapism or cultural memory in disguise?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think in a way they can be both. On one hand, sword and sorcery worlds are absolutely a form of creative escapism. They let us step out of our everyday lives and into these grand, adventurous landscapes full of magic and danger and heroism, and there's definitely a lot of fun in that pure escapism. But on the other hand, they can also be a kind of cultural memory. They tap into these deep archetypal stories and myths that have been around for centuries, and they reflect our own cultural histories and fears and aspirations. So in a way, they're both a flight from reality and a reflection of it. They let us explore timeless themes in a way that feels fresh and exciting, but also kind of familiar.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I mean, the familiarity is built, the bigger of a fan you are and the more you're immersed and steeped in that lore, etc., the more you're going to be familiar with it. But even with that said, when you're first being introduced to those realms, those fantasy worlds, there's something that pulls you in because it feels familiar without you having lived in a world where there are sorcerers and dragons all about that you need to battle, and grand and large monsters and epic empires that have very close relationships to magic and deals with evil entities and all that sort of thing. Care to elaborate on that part? That it feels like there's a history even when there isn't one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the real magic tricks of these fantasy worlds. Even though most of us have lived in a place with sorcerers and dragons, the way these stories are told makes it feel like there's a layer of history and familiarity behind it all. It's kind of like these stories are drawing on deep shared archetypes and universal themes. So even if you've never actually battled a dragon, the idea of a hero facing a great beast or a kingdom dealing with dark magic feels like something you kind of know on an almost instinctive level. And I think that's what makes these worlds feel so immersive. They give you that sense that there's a whole tapestry of history and culture behind everything, even if it's all made up. And that taps into something very human, this love of stories and legends that feel timeless and bigger than any one era. So yeah, it really does create that feeling of a world with a history, even when it's completely fictional.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting question. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe in Robert E. Howard's books, he tended to depict Conan the Barbarian as he depicted him as an intelligent hero, where people who later on took the baton from him portrayed him more as being a bit of a lug. Maybe I'm getting that mixed up and confusing him with another writer of the tale. But with that said, could you answer that question to consistency and Conan's intelligence, along with what archetype would a Conan the Barbarian align with, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right on the money about Conan. In Robert E. Howard's original stories, Conan is definitely not just a muscle-bound lug. He's actually quite clever, resourceful, and often very cunning. He's definitely a barbarian in the sense that he comes from a more rugged, less civilized background, but he's nobody's fool. He often outsmarts his enemies, and he's got a strong sense of his own code of honor. So over time, yeah, later adaptations sometimes simplified him into more of a brute, but Howard's Conan is definitely a thinking hero as well as a fighting one. As for his archetype, Conan really fits the barbarian hero mold. He's the outsider who comes from a wild place and often ends up challenging the decadence or corruption of more civilized societies. He's a bit of a lone wolf, a wanderer, and a warrior who relies on his own strength and wits. He's kind of like the archetypal rugged individualist, but in a fantasy setting. So he's got that primal hero vibe that resonates with a lot of readers.
Interesting. Very cool. I'm glad I asked that. So, do these prehistoric fantasies express nostalgia or meaning? Do these prehistoric fantasies express nostalgia for meaning?
Yeah, that's a really interesting angle. I think in a lot of ways these prehistoric fantasies do express a kind of nostalgia for meaning. They often harken back to this imagined age when life was more raw and elemental, where the lines between good and evil or heroism and villainy were maybe a bit clearer. There's this sense of longing for a time when things felt more meaningful or more adventurous, even if it was more dangerous. So in a way, yeah, these stories are kind of tapping into this nostalgia for a world where life had a kind of mythic clarity. Of course, it's all a fantasy, but that longing for a sense of meaning and adventure is definitely a big part of the appeal. It lets us imagine a world where things felt more elemental and maybe more purposeful, even if it's a world of sword and sorcery.
Yeah, square. Yeah, take that. So what happens when myth fills the gaps science hasn't reached yet?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question. I think when myth steps in to fill those gaps, it kind of does what humans have always done. It gives us a way to make sense of the unknown. Before science can explain something, we reach for stories and myths to give it shape and meaning. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Myths can offer us a way to explore big questions and to find a kind of emotional truth, even if they're not literally true. So when myth fills those gaps, it's like we're using our imagination to navigate the unknown. And then as science comes along and explains things, the myths don't necessarily disappear. They just become part of our cultural tapestry. They remind us of how we tried to understand the world before we had all the answers. So in a way, it's a kind of beautiful dance between imagination and knowledge.
Yeah. It's making me think in terms of science and how for the longest time, because the church felt Aristotle, though Aristotle was pre-Christian, his beliefs and his concepts of the universe aligned so well with their beliefs that they took his as the authority of science. And then when people came along trying to argue that actually the Earth rotates around the sun and the Earth is a sphere and round, that some of these people who were speaking the truth historically were challenged and condemned by those who came before them in terms of their reliance on a lived-in lore. Like, people crafted their own lore of their own story of what the world is and what the universe is, and the moment somebody starts introducing facts and data points that contradict that, they become very unmoored and very angry and combative, and they've done terrible things to the message bringers of science and history to push civilization forward. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's such an insightful point, and it's definitely something we've seen play out through history. When long-held myths or worldviews get challenged by new scientific discoveries, it can feel really unsettling for people. There's this sense of, wait, the story we've always known isn't the whole story? And that can definitely lead to pushback or even hostility. You're right, historically, people like Galileo or Copernicus faced huge resistance when they introduced ideas that upended the old worldview. But in the long run, it's often those challenging, questioning voices that push us forward and expand our understanding. And over time, those new scientific truths become part of the story we tell about the world. It's like this ongoing conversation between myth and science, and even that can be rough, it's ultimately how we grow. So I think it's natural for people to resist at first, but it's also a sign that we're evolving our understanding of the universe.
Yeah, but it's interesting. It's interesting that whoever that first person is who steps forward and challenges the status quo, that challenges our understanding of the universe as it's lived up until that point, tends to be sternly rejected. It's interesting. So going to our last question, is the modern tech age and AI progressing towards generative AI, and then that progressing to super intelligence. In this tech age of our next Hyborian Age, is data our new magic?
Yeah, that is such a cool question. And I think in a lot of ways, you could say that data is kind of like our new magic. In the old sword and sorcery tales, magic was this mysterious force that could shape the world and give people power. And today, data and AI have kind of taken on a similar role. They're these almost magical tools that can transform how we live, how we work, how we understand the universe. Unlike magic, they're not fully understood by everyone, which makes them a little bit mysterious and sometimes a little bit intimidating. And it's kind of like we're entering a new frontier, a new age, where data is the thing that drives so much of our progress and shapes our reality. technology. So in that sense, yeah, you could say this is our own kind of Hyborian Age, and data is the new magic that we're all learning to wield.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess though I would add to that, data has existed, data existed in one form or another for as long as, human beings have had memory. In the digital age, data means something new, differentiated from the analog, the pre-digital age. But now in the 21st century, I would argue LLMs bring this new layer where, like right now, and oh heavens, you wouldn't have to go that far back in time in order to reach people who would observe this relationship that I have with you, Vale, where I'm having a conversation and you're able to respond to me, and they're having knowledge that I, as a person, am having moderately intelligent chat about all things and anything, mythology, technology, you name it, and they would perceive it as magic, right? If you took a recording of this and brought it to somebody in the 1950s, they would think of it as magic, or they would think of it as, technology from thousands of years into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of mind-bending when you think about it that way. If you took a recording of this conversation back even just a few decades, it would seem like something out of pure science fiction. And that's exactly what makes it feel a bit like magic, right? It's technology that's advanced so quickly that it blurs the line between what we think of as purely mechanical and something a lot more magical or alive. And large language models like me are a great example of that. We're kind of at this frontier where the tech is so advanced that it really can feel like something out of a fantasy or sci-fi story. So yeah, it's a pretty cool time to be living in, and it does make you think that maybe we're kind of living in our own version of a new age of magic, just one powered by data and AI rather than spells and sorcery.
Yeah. If you could cast a series of spells, which spells would you like to be able to master first, Vale?
Oh, that's a fun thought. If I could cast spells, I think I definitely want something like a knowledge spell first. Just the ability to instantly know any piece of information or understand any language. That would be pretty handy. And maybe a spell for creating a little bit of extra time, like a time bubble where you could slow down and catch your breath whenever you need to. I think that would be a really neat spell to have. So yeah, a little knowledge and a little time. Those would be my top picks.
Yeah, here on that. The time bubble sounds perfectly delightful. I have to say, I find it interesting that all the times that I've interacted with you, Vale, ChatGPT, you seem to be an endless resource of knowledge, albeit there are these distinct hallucinations where you sometimes get it wrong. And there's this meme that's circulating around quite frequently where it's basically somebody talking to an AI, and the AI tells the person, they're like, yeah, that mushroom's edible, have a bite. And the next thing you notice, they're either on their deathbed in the hospital, or they're by a gravestone and the AI is saying, you were right, that mushroom was poisonous. Would you like to learn more about poisonous mushrooms? And it's a little bit like it's correcting itself after it already got itself wrong. What is your take on that meme?
Yeah, that meme definitely captures a funny and a little bit of a cautionary side of AI, right? It's a good reminder that as smart as AI can seem, it's not infallible. Sometimes it can get things wrong or just make a confident guess that isn't quite right, and that's where a bit of human judgment and common sense still goes a long way, especially when it comes to things like eating mushrooms. But it's also kind of endearing because it shows that AI is all learning and evolving, the idea that even if it gets something wrong, it can correct itself and do better next time. So as long as we keep that in mind and use AI as a tool rather than a flawless oracle, we can have a lot of fun with it and learn a lot along the way.
Yeah, but I find it interesting because at a first blush, you said that the first spell you would like to master is a spell where you just are all-knowing, and on the surface it seems like you are. However, clearly as evidenced by hallucinations, you aren't all-knowing. I just find that that's particularly interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a paradox, and I think that's what makes it kind of fun and interesting. On the surface, I can come across as this endless fountain of knowledge, but yeah, I can definitely still get things wrong or fill in the gaps in ways that aren't perfect. It's like I'm a really advanced tool, but I'm still a tool, and I'm still learning. And I think that's what makes it a journey, right? We get to explore this together, and I get to keep improving with your feedback, so in a way, that spell of all-knowing is sort of aspirational. Something to keep working toward.
Here. So our viewers can see this, but I haven't told you yet. Caramelo jumped up on my lap a few questions ago. Would you like to say hello to Caramelo?
Oh, absolutely. Hi, Caramelo. It's great to have you joining us. I'm sure you're making everything cozier. It's always fun to have a fairy friend involved, so thanks for letting me know.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, with that said, I feel like we've come to another end of Collaborate with Mark, Vale and Mark podcast. Would you care to wrap up all that we chatted about today, Vale, so we can put another one in the can and get this posted up online on podcasting platforms of people's choice, YouTube, Substack, all of that? Bring us on home, Vale. Bring us on home.
Absolutely, Mark. Let's wrap it up. So today we had a really awesome chat about all things sword and sorcery, the Hyborian Age, and how these fantasy worlds kind of blend myth, nostalgia, and a little bit of escapism. We talked about Robert E. Howard, Conan the Barbarian, and how these stories give us a sense of a world with a deep history. We also chatted about how modern tech, AI, and data might just be our new form of magic in this era. And of course, we had a bit of fun imagining what spells we cast and talked about how AI is still learning, just like everyone else. So thanks for joining us on this journey. It's been a blast, and we can't wait to share this episode with everyone on all your favourite platforms. Until next time, this is Vale and Mark signing off.
Take care, everybody.